Good morning, or good afternoon, as the case may be. I'm Adam Lupel, IPI Vice President, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all to today's virtual policy forum, Independent Reviews of UN Peace Operations, the Way Forward. Allow me to begin by expressing our sincere appreciation to our partners, the Permanent Mission of Switzerland to the UN, and to the French Ministère des Armies for their support to this project and for their partnership in today's event. And I should also acknowledge the government of the United Kingdom for the initial funding that made the early stages of this research possible. By their nature, peace operations are partnership enterprises, and that incorporate a diverse set of interests in their strategic development. And as a result, independent perspectives are a critical part of any credible, comprehensive assessment of a peace operation. And that is why truly independent reviews are so valuable. UN peace operations are constantly evolving, and many of their best practices emerge through experimentation and lived experience. It often takes time for these best practices to filter through the organization to become standard policy. Independent reviews themselves, for example, have come to play an important and increasingly popular role since they first began in 2017. But the practice is not formally codified or methodically articulated in any departmental guidance. So with this project, as with much of IPI's work on UN peace operations, we seek to make a contribution by documenting the parameters of this new practice, identifying some of the challenges, and offering critical reflections and concrete proposals on how to make improvements. Our initial perspective on independent reviews was shaped by the experience of our colleague, IPI Senior Advisor Yusuf Mahmoud, who led the 2019 independent review of MONUSCO. We will hear from him shortly, and he will reflect on some of his own experiences and share his own insights. But most of today's discussion will be anchored in the research and report prepared by my colleague, Daniel Forti, Senior Policy Analyst in IPI's Brian Urquhart Center for Peace Operations. This research has been going on over the better part of the past year. And in the course of that, we cooperated very closely with the Executive Office of the Secretary General and the UN Department of Peace Operations. And I just want to say that we're really, really grateful for their support and cooperation throughout this process. The report, which I have a copy of here, I can give a little, Independent Reviews of UN Peace Operations, a Study of Politics and Practice, was published just last week, and you can find it on our website, ipins.org. It's really quite comprehensive. I recommend it wholeheartedly. We have an excellent panel gathered today, but before I introduce them, we will hear two additional opening remarks from our partners. And so first, I'd like to welcome Ambassador Pascal Barswil, Permanent Representative of Switzerland to the UN, and then she will be followed by Brigadier General Roland Marguerite, Head of the Defense Mission at the Permanent Mission of France to the UN. But first, Ambassador Barswil, the floor is yours. Please.
Thank you very much, Adam. Excellencies, dear colleagues, a very good morning. And I would like to start by thanking the International Peace Institute, IPI, for convening us today for what I think is a really topical policy discussion and the launch of a very insightful report. We were glad to contribute to this effort, and I would like to also thank all the partners, including the UK and France. Even before joining as a member state of the United Nations, roughly 20 years ago, my country contributed to UN peace operations, and even so we are not contributing large numbers. We are always trying to contribute with niche assets, for example, with specialists in demining. And I'm particularly proud that for the first time, a Swiss officer will be assuming the highest military function in a UN peacekeeping operation, as Major General Patrick Gauchat has just been appointed a couple of days ago head of mission and chief of staff of the United Nations Truth Supervision Organization. The objective set out in this report speaks right to one of our key priorities at the UN, to support sound policy decisions by bringing informed, rigorous, and credible perspectives into the debates. Peace operations are perhaps the most visible tool of the UN, and nevertheless, failures have a fatal impact on trust and lives. And this is where independent reviews play an essential role, to prevent failure and correct mistakes and to increase the performance and impact of peacekeeping missions. The report clearly points at a need for more formal institutionalization of independent reviews. This would promote three essential outcomes. First, expectations as to the results of an independent review are managed. Second, the process and qualifications required are clearly articulated. And third, transparency and trust are generated. Most interesting for my country as a candidate for the Security Council in 23-24 are the recommendations addressed to member states. I would like to highlight two issues emerging from the report. First, the exceptionality of independent reviews. The quality of this tool does not increase by its proliferated use. Restricting their use carefully to critical junctures will ensure the required impact. And second, the need for more transparency is key. Political considerations inevitably accompany a review process, but they should follow the presentation of the review's result, not preempt them. Guaranteeing the independence of such an exercise boosts its credibility. Beyond these elements, the report also offers a wealth of background information and distills it into recommendations that provide a useful starting point for discussion among member states and with the Secretariat. We are glad to participate in this launch and hope that today's exchange will spur further debate. Switzerland is glad to have supported this project together with France, an experienced member of the Security Council, and I look forward to the remarks of General Marguerite, head of the military mission at the Permanent Mission of France. And our candidate for the Security Council carries the motto "A Plus for Peace," so we also understand it as a commitment to contribute our share to a transparent, efficient, and effective United Nations. And today's discussion on UN peace operations squarely fits this goal. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to that discussion.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ambassador. Really grateful for the support and for your leadership on so many issues. We will now hear to Brigadier General Roland Marguerite. Please, General, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Distinguished guests, dear colleagues, first of all, I would like to thank IPI for organizing this seminar with the support of the French Ministry for the Armed Forces. Today's discussion on independent reviews on peace operation illustrates the dynamism of the Peacekeeping Observatory created in 2014 and the fruitful collaboration between IPI and the French Ministry for the Armed Forces. I hope this partnership will continue in the future. As a member of the Security Council, a major contributor to the UN peacekeeping budget, a troop contributor and pen holder on 4 peace operations, France defends a proactive and ambitious vision of peacekeeping. Despite their limitations and their current challenges, peace operations play a key role in assisting countries and populations who suffer violence, economic and social crisis with complex dynamics. This complexity explains the need of continuing the current efforts to strengthen the analysis and assessment on how these missions implement their mandate, their real effect on their environment, the very nature of the challenges they face, and the best ways to address them. In this context, France is particularly attentive to actively support the reforms undertaken by Mr. Antonio Guterres, including the Action for Peacekeeping initiative. The Ministerial Conference of Seoul in December will give a new impetus to improve the impact and efficiency of peacekeeping thanks to the 7 goals of 4P+ and this action plan. Evaluating the strategies, performance, and impact of peacekeeping missions is a difficult but essential task for the UN. It must therefore receive a major attention in order to enhance their effectiveness and efficiency. As such, the article written by IPI through extensive research provides a clear and pedagogical summary of the evolution of the UN efforts in this area and offers a clear analysis on the intricacy of this practice. In this sense, independent review are a particular useful tool for the Council and provide essential on-the-ground analysis to guide mission mandates where and when necessary. That is why France has suggested the ongoing independent strategic review on the response of peacekeeping operation to the threat of improvised explosive devices, briefly mentioned in its article. It was our initiative that the PRST on the subject, adopted on May 24, 2021, requested the Secretary General to conduct an independent strategic review of the threat of IEDs, a growing threat in many missions. This independent review will help the Security Council to have a better view on the challenges posed by IEDs in terms of security, but also of mandate delivery, and will give, we do hope so, a broad range of recommendations to improve the current situation to the benefit of peacekeepers' security and mission efficiency. To conclude, I would like to mention the political context of these reviews. The example mentioned in the article about the review of MINUSMA in 2018 is of interest. In the context of the Cruz report, the review led by Mrs. Hélène Lodge was driven by UNSG's desire to reduce the significant losses suffered by the mission. Knowing that not all of the options presented in the report contributed to this objective, we recommended, in line with the advice of MINUSMA's leadership and other supporting states, not to close one base in northern Mali. Such a closure was unanimously considered ineffective to allow a significant reduction of losses. France also believed that a reduction of losses could not be achieved by conceding ground to the terrorist groups, but by improving the mission performance. It is essential to note that the UN has since continuously advocated to maintain the configuration of the mission as it is. A set of measures aiming to improving the mission's performance was also implemented, culminating with the current adaptation plan adopted by the UNSC in January last year. Thanks to the resolute action of MINUSMA's leadership, losses have significantly been cut since, without reducing the mission footprint in northern Mali. We will have the opportunity to discuss these issues in greater depth during the conference. I now leave the floor to IPI and in particular to Daniel Forti to discuss this article in detail. Good session to all.
Thank you, General. Really appreciate that, those voices of support and mentioning our long-standing project together, the Peacekeeping Observatory, and also for such substantive engagement and really that reminder there at the end about one of the reasons why we want to improve the performance of peace operations. It is to reduce losses, save lives is a big part of it. Wonderful. We'll now turn to our panel discussion. We have a great panel here, a lot of expertise in our virtual room. Following the panel discussion, we should have plenty of time for Q&A. So for those of you who are in our virtual room, please use the Q&A or the chat function to send us your questions, and we'll try to insert those into the Q&A later. So first, let me just go through. We have the author of our report, Mr. Daniel Forti, IPI Senior Policy Analyst. We have Ms. Ayaka Suzuki, Director of Strategic Planning and Monitoring at the Executive Office of the UN Secretary General, USG. Ms. Rania Dargash, Chief of Policy and Best Practices at the UN Department of Peace Operations. Ms. Jacqueline Seck, Director of UN DPPA, DPO's Northern Africa Division, and Dr. Yusuf Mahmood, IPI Senior Advisor and former lead on the Independent Strategic Review of MINUSCA. With that, we will turn to Daniel to give us an overview of the report and its findings. Daniel, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Adam. Good morning and good afternoon to all. It's a pleasure to speak with you today to discuss the research, and I'm really humbled by all the support that IPI has received throughout this process. I'll spend my few minutes today offering a broad overview of the paper we published last week, focusing mostly on the report's findings and recommendations. Just a bit of context about independent reviews. I think if we were to characterize them in one sentence, independent reviews of UN peace operations are complex analytical processes and highly political undertakings. There have been 19 independent reviews since 2017, covering both peacekeeping operations and field-based special political missions. The Secretary General initiated 10 of these reviews, and the Council initiated 9 of them. During this report, I grouped these 19 independent reviews into 3 unofficial phases. The first phase of 3 reviews emerged as the byproduct of breakdowns in trust between the Security Council and the UN Secretariat, and much of the early parts of this report contextualizes what this breakdown in trust entailed. The second phase of independent reviews was anchored by the Secretary General's formal initiative to review 8 UN peacekeeping operations. And the third ongoing phase of independent reviews is a reflection of what I consider to be the Security Council's push for greater ownership over these processes. Much of the report itself is structured around the prominent dimensions of the independent review process. Not every independent review has followed every single stage put out in the report, but many of them share these common experiences over the past 5 years. Some of these prominent dimensions include understanding the motivations and mandates for why an independent review has been requested, the context and dynamics of choosing the team leader, which I consider to be both an art and a science, managing hybrid review teams, so to understand that these exercises are conducted by an external team leader who are supported by current UN staff, the different ways that review teams have designed and implemented their methodologies, how the review teams have managed diverse interests when undertaking consultations in New York, in the country of the host state, and in the region surrounding a country. Issues related to how the final report is prepared and transmitted. And then finally, what happens to independent reviews when the report is finalized, completed, and settled. So I really want to focus on 6 main findings that we put forward as the core of our analysis. First, independence is really a relative concept. At the most foundational level, independence means that the independent team leader has an ability to prepare and submit both findings and recommendations that are free from external influence. But in reality, independence is shaped by more than just that. In how an independent review situates itself and exerts this independence often depends on the political dynamics surrounding the mission, the review's mandate and the review client, i.e. whether it's the council or the secretariat, the composition of the review team and the methodology that ultimately emerges, as well as the transparency and dissemination of the final report. Second, member states, UN Secretariat officials, and missions themselves have diverse and often competing interests regarding independent reviews. Major divergences and the extent to which any independent team leader can manage these interests impacts the extent to which a report's findings and recommendations are taken forward. Third, independent reviews, in my opinion, are best understood as exceptional responses to trust deficits. And I appreciate Ambassador Bayer's in mentioning this in her opening remarks. In my opinion, reviews have been most effective when creating space for sensitive political discussions about a mission's strategic orientations, and this impact does not necessarily correlate with more frequent independent reviews. Fourth, I found that key stakeholders don't share a common understanding of independent reviews' objective or utility. This is part by design and partially a product of the fact that independent reviews are not always clear from how they distinguish from other types of review and assessment processes led in the UN. And I hope that this research can make a tangible contribution in situating independent reviews within the broader policy landscape for UN peace operations. Fifth, we found that independent reviews often have to balance methodological flexibility with the push for greater standardization. Each review is designed to address a specific context, so we can't expect a cookie cutter approach for every single process. But because review teams have previously had, somewhat limited access to guidance, best practice, and reflections on previous experiences, many people who ultimately participated in these exercises found themselves reinventing the wheel. Sixth and finally, I argue that independent reviews need to overcome their orphan status within the UN to be sustainable. It's important to note that these exercises are advisory in nature. So by design, they don't necessarily have an institutional home, a long-term political champion, or a constituency of support within or outside the UN. This presents a reality where final reports can be swept aside if they push up too hard against the status quo, or they could end up just becoming a reflection of the various political interests that led to their mandating in the first place. So looking at all of this, and the report goes into a lot of detail about the past 5 years, I offer recommendations to 3 core constituencies: the UN system, the review teams, and the member states. I won't go into all the recommendations, but just to highlight a few that I think are really important to discuss. For the UN system, I argue that the UN system should codify independent reviews within formal UN policy so that the practice is both defined and contextualized alongside other frameworks and practices. And in this slide, I also think it's helpful for the Secretariat to consolidate best practices and resources from completed reviews so that future teams have them at their fingertips. I want to highlight that review teams should prioritize diversity in the composition of their future reviews. This goes for the team leader across gender, geographic, and skill set areas, and for the team members themselves. I think one of the challenging statistics I uncovered was that of the 19 independent reviews that have taken place, only 2 of them have been led by women. It's important to highlight that the gender of the team leader doesn't correlate with the quality of gender analysis in the report, but I think in line with the SG's broader commitments to gender parity across the UN system, this is an important area for gains. And I think ultimately the composition of the review teams ultimately have to have the right tools to answer the specific questions they're asked to design. And then I encourage the UN system to improve reporting both internally and externally on independent reviews. So that's tracking the findings, recommendations, and how they're carried forward, both for mission-specific discussions and at a broader policy level. For the independent review teams, I encourage them to emphasize transparency throughout all aspects of their work, including by planning for their review exercises to be made public from the very beginning of their process. In my opinion, transparency affirms their independence, builds trust, and strengthens their credibility. I also acknowledge that if these reviews are done right, there are going to be a couple of issues that can't always be discussed in a particularly public format. And there are options and experiences where cover letters or annexes can convey sensitive confidential information while keeping the analytical foundations and core of the review's recommendations intact and for public discussion. I also encourage the review teams to what I call build internal and external constituencies. So finding channels to build support for the review exercise among the mission, among different parts of the UN system, among national stakeholders, even if there's not a uniformed agreement on the best policies and recommendations moving forward. It also is important for sustainability that there's a larger group of constituents who are invested in the review exercise. And then similarly, I encourage them to embrace diverse research methods and approaches. The report documents a lot of different practices and innovations that have emerged through the independent review. Some are now very commonplace, the use of red teams to sort of challenge and test the assumptions and findings, the strong role of data analytics, the use of conflict analysis forums convened by external partners, and then other ad hoc practices, the recruitment of external colleagues to serve as pen holders or gender advisors, the use of anonymous surveys of mission staff or town halls with communities in the host country. There are lots of ways that these independent review teams can diversify and broaden how they undertake their studies. And then finally, for member states, 3 or 4 core issues. First is treating independent reviews as exceptional processes instead of increasingly standard. I think they're most impactful when they aren't the default practice. And I also think it's the same part of the conversation for member states to continuously ask the Secretariat to improve and refine how it undertakes its own internally led strategic reviews, assessments, and evaluations, where I also feel the UN has made progress in recent years. I encourage council members and the broader UN membership to debrief each review team leader following the conclusion of a report, whether in public discussion, whether in ARIA formula formats, or even private consultations such as closed door settings or informal interactive dialogue. I encourage the broader UN membership, whether in the C34 committee, the fourth committee, the Security Council's working group on peacekeeping operations, to engage the Secretariat regularly on these broader tools for analysis, planning, and evaluation of UN peace operations, where there's a lot of work being done, but we also want to always see continuous practice of getting better. And then finally, I think one part that's been interesting of this is that independent reviews have often been impacted by admin issues. And so we make a recommendation that the Security Council should give ample time for these exercises to take place, at very least the minimum of 7 months. Let me just stop here, and thanks very much for this. I look forward to the discussion.
Great, thanks. Thank you, Daniel. Excellent job in considering the really amount of detail and substance that is in this report. One thing that I would like to recommend for those watching is to take a look at the report. There's some really great charts and graphics in there that goes through some of the issues that Daniel raised. It's a very systematic report. And one thing much of what you said, I was thinking in my mind, one of the first things that you said in characterizing independent reviews, that these are complex analytical exercises as well as deeply political. And I think these points that you make about, obviously the real importance of the independence speaks to that, as well as while in my introduction, I indicated, we're looking to help to standardize some of the guidelines here. That has to be balanced with flexibility because of the specifics of each context in these really exceptional reviews, as was indicated by the ambassador and you repeatedly. Wonderful. We will now move on to Ayaka Suzuki from EOSG. Ayaka, please, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you so much. Good morning, good afternoon, colleagues. So first of all, big congratulations on this report. It is very comprehensive, so very well done. And I wanted to thank IPI for inviting me today and also for closely consulting us during the preparation of this report. Well, as Daniel rightly said, there is now a critical mass of recent examples. I actually hadn't counted, but 19, that's quite a bit. So it is timely to take stock and adjust our approach where it's needed. For example, the report recommended that guidance on independent review methodologies should be standardized, which I fully agree with, and so that the teams don't need to reinvent the wheel. Such advice is really well timed as demand for independent reviews seem to grow even more. I wanted to take a few more minutes just to talk about how these independent reviews link to Secretary General's priorities and why it's important to us. So improving independent review processes is an opportunity to further align UN family and member states towards greater performance and results orientation. This is one of the 5 main goals of UN 2.0 Quintet of Change, which I hope all of you have seen this by now, read this by now, Secretary General's Our Common Agenda report. And one of EOSG's priority initiatives is precisely to strengthen the UN's integrated assessment and planning capacity as recommended by the 2020 review of UN integration. So even though it's not specifically focused on integration, it's very much related to that. Integrated planning and independent reviews they're similar in that they demand complex stakeholder management, analysis that looks across cross-pillar perspectives, and cross-pollination of these parallel initiatives is a great opportunity to facilitate transformation in line with the Quintet of Change. Some independent reviews also reflect the growing importance of learning from and implementing data strategy of the Secretary General. Daniel has spoken about the use of analytics. So reviews are good examples of data-driven analysis to inform structured decision-making. They embody the principles of collaboration, excellence, openness, and sharing that are highlighted in the data strategy. So I was very happy to see that the IPI report highlighted the incorporation of data analytics into past independent reviews. EOSG is currently leading efforts to make data products even more accessible throughout the UN system, which will aid review teams in the future to incorporate more data into their reviews. And just maybe I could just talk a little bit about EOSG's role in independent reviews, which has been to provide strategic and methodological guidance, as well as facilitating red team exercises, which are covered quite extensively in the report. We have found these red team exercises to be quite interesting. And I mean, in my view, I think they have been very useful to team leaders. They were designed to serve as a challenge function to really break down kind of a groupthink that has prevailed in some previous assessment processes. We questioned through the red team lines of inquiry and preliminary findings and findings of independent reviews and emerging recommendations to make sure that the conclusions and recommendations of these independent strategic reviews are comprehensive, practical, and evidence-based, and not really driven by as I said, groupthink or what the prevailing kind of conventional wisdom. Each red team composed of 5 to 7 experts are assembled for each exercise, and then they collectively represent expertise necessary to thoroughly review the material from all perspectives. So that's just one of the innovations that we have helped with. And but what I have observed is that, and this is very relevant for Security Council members and then future member, hopefully present at this virtual workshop today, is that often when these independent reviews are mandated, the timelines are unrealistically short. So I would strongly support IPI's recommendation for at least 7 months minimum review period if we really want quality products. And given, I mean, Adam has also reiterated Daniel's point that these are analytically complex processes and very politically complex as well. So within EOSG, independent reviews have provided valuable lessons on the conduct of complex analytical reviews, and these can be applied not just to independent reviews, but also for strategic assessments and risk reviews and our usual integrated analysis and exercises. And so IPI suggestions to codify lessons learned from independent review processes, including through debriefing the review team leader, I think would be helpful for everybody's work, EOSG included, in other areas of evaluation and analysis. So we look forward to exploring how we can implement the recommendations of this report and to continue our productive partnership with IPI. One of our immediate term priorities is to codify common independent review methodologies into a concise guidance document, even as simple as a checklist, with the goal of executive committee endorsement. The Deputies Committee actually recently discussed this IPI's draft report before it was finalized and voiced support for efforts to improve the process and impact of independent reviews. And we're also looking for entry points to link independent reviews to existing policy frameworks. The IPI report raises an important point that these independent reviews are not officially codified in any formal UN policies, doesn't have an anchoring office. So ongoing discussions, including in the Deputies Committee, we're trying to identify potential policy homes for these independent reviews. And one such option is the integrated analysis and planning policy, which is currently under revision as per the recommendations from the integration review. So to conclude, we hope to continue this dialogue with all of you and hope to be able to share progress in terms of improving the methodology, and then ultimately it is about improving performance of our very important peace operations. So, so thank you again for the opportunity to speak today.
Great, thank you, Ayaka, so much for giving us some insights into, among other things, the EOSG role in independent reviews, which is so critically important, and the vision forward, and also really important to me is adding to this question of why this is important, that it's not just about reviewing these very specific context of the independent strategic reviews, but also how to link them up to the broader strategies, priorities of the Secretary General, including, as you mentioned, focus on performance and results, but also on the broader questions of how we can work better together as an integrated system. And that in order to do that, it's really important to be able to take a step back and have an independent view. That's one of the key sort of selling points of IPI that we often talk about, is that because we are independent, we're able to sort of look across silos in a way that provides a view that it remains difficult to do within the departments in the system. There's a lot of effort to do it. There's a lot of recognition that this is important, but that independent perspective remains critically important in order to do it sort of holistically. So thank you very much. Now we are confronted with, is Rania available? Yes, great, good, you're here. So we are now turning to Department of Peace Operations, and Rania Dagash, Chief of Policy and Best Practices at DPO. Rania, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Adam and Daniel. It's really an honor to be with you, and thank you also to Switzerland and France, and as you said, to the UK for starting a lot of this. It's really hard to come in after Ayaka, guys, so I am going to try. Before I go into independent reviews, if you allow me, I just wanted to make a broad point about how the UN used strategic assessments and reviews before our internal process that led to this breakdown in trust that Daniel referred to. And I really enjoyed working with Daniel on this and breaking some of these arguments down. And I'll come to what I agree with and what I don't agree with. But I just want a reminder that strategic assessments and reviews are part of our operations and have evolved to become part of the DNA of how UN operations look at themselves, whether it's through our old planning frameworks, the IMPP, or the current integrated assessment and planning tools, and the revised one that Ayaka referred to will also incorporate some of this. So I think it's a perfect time to have this conversation so that we do manage to infuse the DNA with stronger elements like independent reviews. But in what a strategic assessment did, it basically was a fundamental process that stopped at a key moment in a country, any shift in major political context that required us to look at conflict analysis, stakeholders, our configuration or reconfiguration for that matter, peace consolidation priorities, and how we come together as a system across peace, security, development, and humanitarian actors. And the integration part of this is quite key, really, because it is ultimately about impact. So it's good to remember that, as Ayaka also noted. Now, these independent reviews and assessments could be triggered many ways in the UN. The SG can do it. Those on ground can do it, an SRSG, a resident coordinator, the executive committee in this case. They can be triggered many ways. And I think there is health in that, because different people see the context in different ways. And it was meant as a way to also do some checks and balances on our operations. And for most part, I think the concept behind it worked really well and developed a very good methodology that the independent reviews also built on. What I liked in what Roland said is he's right. Most of these internal reviews focused on country contexts, but thematics are relatively new, and I think a great addition to how we should be doing business. So I will now take you to what our own review of the peacekeeping independent reviews told us. We looked at how we did these 8 different assessments that the Secretary General commissioned, and Daniel captured most of it really well. But it was fundamental for us in several ways. It helped us refocus on the primacy of politics. And I know this is a term that is overused, but it truly did attempt to build consensus around a clear political strategy. And the CAR example is maybe the one that's closest to my mind, because it did help us re-engage in CAR. It helped us work with the AU in a different way. Just give me one. Sorry, thank you. And that was and remains a really important element of how I think we should do business in the future. Now, some of these reviews also helped us consider the degree to which our mandates were realistic. We did not see many mandates curtailed by the Council as a result of these reviews, but we may want to ask ourselves what the reasons for that might be, but it at least generated some debate, and that is extremely healthy. We also noted that the reviews might not and do not always present one set of recommendations, but a series of options, as Yusuf is on the line and I think will elaborate a lot more on this, but it also fosters a debate and deliberation, especially when there are different views around this. And then finally, an interesting point that came out of our reviews, were the review of the reviews, was that it might be interesting to have independent reviews not just look at one country, but to actually look at multiple missions and peace operations in one context. A mission and an envoy operating in an area, a mission and a regional office, but just having a look more broadly about the UN's engagement in a region in response to the Secretary General's push also for regional engagement. Now, there are many excellent points in the work that Daniel put together, and again, congratulations. I agree with most of the 12 recommendations. I especially like that reviews led by independent experts are a useful step in changing culture and practice, and that they should be incorporated in the DNA. And as we just said, there is an opportunity for that, but it brings fresh thinking and fresh perspectives. We also agree that the independence of a team leader is a relative concept. You know, it's really the figure of that team leader heading a mixed team, and this whole dichotomy between should they know our operations or should they come totally alien to them so that they truly can push us out of the box, because our sense was not many pushed us out of the box. And so I think there is room potentially for us to mix leadership in some of these reviews, or maybe co-lead them, so that there is a thinker on the region, but someone who, and coupled with someone who knows the UN, and instigate debate within the review teams in a sense. The red teaming is definitely a fantastic practice that has to now just infiltrate all that we do, not just independent reviews. And Ayaka's team is helping us now with a lessons learned study we're doing on UNAMID, and they're red teaming that with us. So I think it's a brilliant practice. It's underutilized, and it has to become an integral part of most that we do. The data analytics, we also strongly endorse, though its utility for us it varied. It was extremely easy on the uniform side. It wasn't necessarily easy on the political side, because what are you analyzing there and what are you breaking down? It takes time, it takes dedicated teams, and it takes clarity of concept. What is the team leader and the team looking at? Because the data crew aren't magicians. They don't just produce the data. You actually have to tell them what is it that you want them to dig into. And often there, we found a breakdown of being able to tell them what is it that we want them to extrapolate and show us trends on. And Daniel, I think it's horrific that only one woman led a review team, and I do hope that that changes. On when we should turn to independent reviews, I am personally of the view, and maybe it's my background, that reviews should be part of what every mission does consistently. I don't think it should be an event. I honestly think we should do it consistently, HQ, partners, and member states and missions together on a regular basis. And that should at least help us improve our understanding of context better collectively. And by extension, how do we then respond to them? I also think that this lack of trust or consensus may reflect different perspectives, interests, and priorities, including between the Council, host states, or parties to the conflict. And these are issues harder to resolve through an independent review, but they trigger the process of these conversations. And I think that's very welcome. On what we do with the reports when they come in, the House on our side, I think, is still debating that. But I would argue that we should lean towards maintaining the credibility, the integrity of a review, and having the Secretary General and the departments do a cover note that actually explains what they agree with and what they disagree with. But maintaining the integrity of those to break down this trust deficit also with the Council that we managed to build very ably. And I think we're able to crack it. I think I'll stop there, actually, Adam, and leave a lot more to questions and answers. But thank you again for this great opportunity and bringing this issue to the fore.
Oh, fantastic, Renee. That's such a great insight into the process at DPO, the process of the review of the reviews. You mentioned that helped to sort of remind you to refocus on the primacy of politics. And I know Yusuf probably picked up his ears at that point. Our former Hippo representative. I also, I'm sensing across all of these interventions that the question of timing is a really, really important one. Both that this conversation is coming at a very good time, but also the question of when is the right time for these strategic reviews, when they're triggered, and how that impacts the objectives of them. Again, this question of why do we do this is really important. I think your openness to being challenged, to being pushed outside of the box is really, really commendable and important. I think the point about that Roland made as well about the going from country context to thematic, and you point from specific country context to regional, is really critically important. I think also speaks back to Ayaka's point about thinking about these strategic reviews, independent reviews, and as we move forward, is how they connect up with larger system priorities, and understanding how we can do that better as we codify, systematize, and move forward with these processes. So all really contributing to this conversation. Much further to discuss, but now we will move on to the Northern Africa Division, and Jacqueline Seck, Director of UNDPA and DPO's Northern Africa Division. Jacqueline, welcome, please. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for inviting us to participate in this very important meeting. Thank you to IPI, first of all, for a very inclusive methodology in developing this report. I too want to thank the work and appreciate the report that was produced, which I find very useful. And I was able, reading through it, to recognize some aspects that I personally totally agree with. I want to thank Switzerland and France and UK, of course, for this as well. I'm here today on behalf of DPPA, but as you said, I'm the director of the Northern Africa Division that reports to both DPPA and DPO. I will concentrate, however, on the special political missions and the DPPA side of the house. I note that in the report, I was also impressed when I saw that there were 19 independent strategic assessments that were conducted over the past couple of years. I also noted the confusion, which I noticed that I myself make between strategic assessment and strategic review. So thank you. I will be more careful with the terminology moving forward. I want to concentrate on a couple of things. Number one, I think that the nature of the operations that we're looking at has an impact on the independent strategic review process. Special political mission by nature are highly political, usually very small in size, and they range from a very targeted mandate to a Christmas tree approach that we're trying to, with very little resources, to implement. So the independent strategic review or assessment process is something that is extremely useful in the life cycle of a small operation that needs to adapt to changing circumstances and that needs to have an external look at how we do things, why we do things, and where we want to go. It's been emphasized that there are different ways to trigger these independent processes, but I think in the case of SPMs, that has a particular bearing, whether it's something that is an internal request from the Secretary General or other internal UN bodies, or whether it's recommended or requested, formally mandated by the Council. Because in the case of special political missions, if you go back to the first one, which was the one that was done for UNSMIL, and we went full circle because the last one that was conducted was also for UNSMIL. So if you look at the ones that are requested by the Secretary General, it's usually when it relates to SPMs, because we have some doubt about the political strategy or the way forward, the positioning of the UN system moving forward. Whereas when it's the Security Council that is requesting it, it's more of a mixed bag. It can be about that, but it could be about the structure. It could be about internal dynamics within the Council. It could be because there is a transition. So we're more constrained when it's mandated by the Security Council, because what we have to do is respond to specific elements of a request that was made for whatever reason. Whereas when it's requested by the Secretary General, it's paradoxically enables us to be more independent because we highlight specifically the areas for which we want external, quote unquote, interference from someone outside. So I think the type of request is an important thing. Second thing is what happens. I am here today because basically, usually when we have independent strategic reviews or any other type of reviews on the DPPA side of the house, the process is usually shepherded along through the regional division. Regional divisions are both the secretariat for the process, as well as the recipient of the recommendations, and then they are the shepherders for the follow-up. So from an external perspective, I can see that it would look like there are some conflicts of interest in that approach. But in fact, I think that the way that we have been implementing these strategic reviews has taken on board our various roles and enabled us to make the best out of what needs to be done. I have looked at the recommendations that were made, and I find that they're very, very useful and very pragmatic. But the fundamental premise of the recommendations is that we need to systematize the approach to independent strategic reviews, and we need to systematize the way we carry them forward, as well as the way we follow through on them. While I fully agree with that approach, I think that the concept of not having a one-size-fits-all approach is quite important, because obviously those strategic review, especially the independent natures, are context-driven, and therefore we cannot systematize every single aspect of the process. What I would agree with is to have an overall approach, and I like the table, I think it's table number 4, that talks about the different reasons why we do a strategic review versus a strategic assessment. And in our codification, it would be helpful to have a menu of options so that we are able to have a little bit more structure, learn from the lessons that were put forward, but at the same time, able to tailor a little bit more to different circumstances. So that would be my overall comment on the recommendations. Now, I'll take a few of the recommendations and comment on them. On the role of team leaders and the teams, I agree that we need independence, and that this independence is relative, because on the one hand, if you have somebody that is completely outside the UN system, has never worked in the UN system, it's difficult to make recommendations that are adaptable to our everyday life. At the same time, if it's somebody that is too much of an insider, then there is no separation, and therefore the whole concept of having an independent strategic review is no longer useful. Where I have a little bit of questions is with regards to the comments on the composition of the team. The study makes it sound like an independent strategic review is a body that lasts for whatever period and that lives outside of our everyday job. Whereas the reality, and that's linked to the next point, which is funding, the reality is that usually you have an independent team leader, and then you have colleagues from different parts of the UN system that represent a cross-pillar approach to support, and that dedicate only part of their time. So I think the issue of who they represent, who they don't represent, that's one thing, but more it's the time commitment that is required to support the independent strategic review that is also a factor, and where they're located. In previous years before COVID-19, we could not envisage a strategic review without having multiple meetings in situ and travel around the different places with everyone. Experience has shown since COVID that we can do some of it virtually, which saves on time, but still, it's not a homogeneous team that will be independent and therefore can last. On the issue of funding, I totally agree. I think that independent strategic review, when they're mandated by the Security Council, in theory, we are able to use assessed contributions. In reality, it's very hard to do so because of the budget cycles that we have for our missions, and because of the way the budgets are done. When we tell missions that we want to use their budget to implement an independent strategic review. You can imagine that with already limited resources, they're not very happy. At the same time, accessing it through different means takes a long time. So de facto, we end up resorting to extra budgetary resources. If we have them on hand, it's fine. Otherwise, we have to fundraise. All this to feed into the, yes, we need lead time in order to be able to carry out successfully an independent strategic review. On the issue of reporting, I think that this has been an issue of contention, but I fall along the lines of what Rania highlighted. Namely, in my view, an independent team leader should be able to, should be told right up front, you will be preparing a report that will be shared in its entirety with either the council, if they are the ones who requested it, or the SG. And if it's a council mandated report, then the UN should use its own internal mechanism to review, approve, recommend some of the recommendations, and have a cover letter to support that. I think it does increase transparency. It increases confidence. But of course, transparency is not the only reason why recommendations don't get fully implemented once adopted. Because obviously, we are talking about an instrument that is advisory in nature. If it's internal, then we were the ones requesting the information to be provided. So the likelihood of implementation is increased. When the independent strategic review is mandated by the council, the likelihood of implementation depends in part on the reaction of member states. First, by the Security Council itself, whether or not it agrees with all, part, or none of the recommendations. And then once they do approve all, part, or none of the recommendations, the extent to which we're able to then access funding for these recommendations.
Great, thanks.
So I will I'm just going to wrap up with one last comment. And that is to say that overall, independent strategic reviews have been conducted in the UN system and have led to a practice that we have been building on. And so we welcome the work that IPI has done to make us improve further this practice. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much. So substantive, those comments, and really really incredibly valuable. And I think just briefly, I think the points, the themes that I'm hearing is, again, the need to balance flexibility and standardization. As you point, there is no one size fits all. We really need to take that into the context into account, in particular as we understand the relative nature of independence, which is an important part of the report. As you point out, the leader is independent, but of course, all of these reviews have people from across the system represented in the teams. And there's a question there about to what extent are they representing their part of the system or independent? And this all has to be part of that complex and analytical and complex political project that is independent review. So definitely seeing the themes across our contributions. Really, thank you so much. And now we will turn to Yusuf Mahmood, IPI Senior Advisor and former lead of an independent review. Yusuf, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Adam. It's a pleasure to share this virtual forum with so many distinguished friends and former colleagues. So much has been said, including the importance of the Red Team contributions and the role of the Secretariat to safeguard the integrity of the independent strategic review report. So I won't bore you by repeating these and other important points made by the previous speakers. So in the interest of time, I will confine my remarks to some personal reflections as a former team leader for the MONUSCO Independent Strategic Review. The review report that we presented to the Security Council through the Secretary General was far from perfect and had already been taken over by events on the ground, even as the ink was drying on that report. Nor were the processes we followed to produce the report flawless. I think the excellent IPI study that was just presented captures some of the good practices and the aspects that we could have done differently. This being said, I wish to highlight 3 areas where I think we did well as a team and share with you a couple of regrets about certain tasks that in hindsight we should have done. Certainly I should have done. The first is that we were able to establish, the first achievement I think that we did well was we're able to establish and let it be known from the get-go that we intended to carry out the mission entrusted to us in full independence, and that our report would be transmitted in its integrality by the Secretary General to the Security Council. There was a great deal of ambiguity on this issue when we started. In this démarche to assert our independence, we were comforted by what the members of the Security Council told us earlier on during a meeting that IPI had convened on our behalf before we traveled to the field. During that meeting, the council members underscored the importance they attached to our independence and their expectation to receive the report unfiltered and unvarnished. The second aspect of our work that I'm proud of was that with the help of the DRC IoT, we were able to put together a gender-balanced, geographically and linguistically diverse team that represented in terms of expertise and experience the various agencies, funds, and programs. We even had a regional representative from the Office of the Special Envoy for the Great Lakes region joining our team. Most of us were proficient in French, including the independent pen holder. And one was a native Swahili speaker. She happened to be DPO's senior gender advisor. Once the final draft of the report was ready, she went through it with fine-tooth comb to ensure that it had captured the gendered perspectives of our interlocutors, both at headquarters and in the field. The third aspect that I was personally proud of was to persuade the Secretariat, despite financial limitations, to secure the services of a local consultant to do a peace mapping of the DRC. The team and I wanted to know what the overwhelming majority of Congolese people, where MONUSCO was not present, can teach us about peace and about how it was being sustained despite the multiple ills afflicting their communities. I felt justified in this request, given that the Security Council mandate asking for the review asked for an assessment, and I quote, of the continued challenges to peace and security in the DRC. Peace in the text was treated as the norm and the challenges and threats as the exception, and not the other way around. The third, these little achievements, methodologically most of them, would not have been possible without the active support of the members of the DRC IoT team and DPO, and without the support of Ayak and her team and the EOSG, and certainly without the support of IPI for having released me to my duties to serve as a team leader, and for releasing my former IPI colleague Nami Diratza to serve as the independent penholder of the strategic review. Now, onto my regrets. I have many of them. but that most of them you could put under the lessons learned column. But let me focus on two of them. The first regret, which Daniel alluded to, was that there were no provisions in our work plan to organize a follow-up meeting with members of Security Council after they had received the report from the Secretary General. The purpose of such meeting would be to brief them on the recommendation, on the findings and the recommendations of the report and the rationale and assumptions that had informed them. More importantly, to share with them the lessons we've learned throughout the exercise so as to help them make informed decisions the next time they are inclined to mandate another independent strategic review. Now that the study is out, IPI may wish to envisage organizing a dedicated meeting to brief him specifically on the findings of the study that is the object of our discussion now. The second regret that I wish I and some other members of the Independent Strategic Review thought we could do was to, or at least we did not do, was to virtually circle back to the many civil society organizations and grassroots representatives who had shared with us valuable perspective that had immensely enriched the contents of our report. Some of them traveled distances to meet with us, while others came with prepared statements, which they delivered haltingly, but with passion and at times anger and frustration. I felt that we had extracted information from them and did not afford them the opportunity to be briefed about their report, the report and its recommendations. Such a gesture done remotely through Zoom or other platforms would have mitigated somewhat the power and knowledge asymmetries that I felt were in full display whenever we met with these local actors whose legitimacy and wisdom far surpassed mine. So I will stop here, Adam. There is so much more of other stuff that we have done that I don't regret, but maybe that were also criticized, but I will be happy to delve into these in the question and answer period. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Yusuf, so much. Your experience, of course, is so valuable, and your reflection, your willingness to share with us your regrets as well as your pride for the achievements. And I think there's sort of two elements that come out here is that we've been talking in this conversation quite a bit about the Secretariat, the role of the Secretariat, the cross pillars approaches, but also the consultations that you raised with the local civil society and local actors, your local consultant, as well as thinking about the role of member states and the need to go back to the Security Council, to those that are sort of the clients in some sense of these, and ask them for follow-up is really, really important. And maybe in her concluding remarks, Alice of the UK can share with us a bit more of the member state perspective. We've only got about 15 minutes left, and there's so much on the table. I think I'd like to go straight back to Daniel first to give him the opportunity to respond some of the direct sort of questions and critiques of the report and some of the recommendations, and then we can see if anyone jumps into the Q&A with some questions, and also give the opportunity to other panelists to provide some final remarks before we move to Alice. So Daniel, there's so much on the table. I see the broad themes that you really raised out in your original presentation around issues related to independence, issues related to transparency, issues related to balancing the flexibility and standardization of this process. Please, the floor is yours for any responses.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Adam. And there's certainly this merits a follow-up conversation or multiple, because I can't get to every point. And I also see that we have one or two points raised in the Q&A that I'll try and answer and also pass on to some of my other panelists. I think I'm glad that everyone has hit on this topic of balancing flexibility and standardization. And I completely agree with the points that this can't be a cookie cutter approach. And the flexibility of this tool is one of its greatest strengths, but the value of building on existing practice and making sure that everyone learns from what's happened and is able to draw on a greater and greater wealth of knowledge to do their role. I'm glad that Ms. Sek's presentation also brought up the dynamics of review clients and how, whether it's the Secretariat or the UN system mandating independent review versus the Security Council mandating an independent review, and what the practical and substantive implications of that are. And I'm glad she raised that. And I think that's an area where I grappled a lot in the report and tried to be as nuanced and reflective as possible. And one point I'd like to raise on that for future consideration is that ever since we've seen, really following Yusuf's review of MONUSCO, we've seen that the council has disproportionately become the client of independent reviews. And I don't think this should be a Security Council exclusive tool. And I do hope to see in the future that the Secretariat and the Secretary General do find opportunities, as Ms. Sek alluded to, in the right moments when you need that challenge function within the UN system to once again use this practice for its own purposes and not solely be responding to council requests for independent reviews. One of the questions raised in the Q&A chat function in terms of the best context to use independent reviews, I'll go back to Rania's point that it's when it's really questions of the primacy of politics and how the politics shape a UN mission's strategy and operations. And I think independent reviews that help provide another input into that broader reflection are when they're most appropriate. And to give you a recent example of what I mean by that in practice, I think the recent review of UNSMIL that Abdullah Batali just led, that I know Ms. Sek has been dealing with on her department, it deals with a lot of the questions of politics, but at the same time, one of its final recommendations is that the UN needs to do a follow-up strategic review to the independent review that focuses on more operational questions of staffing and capacity to support UNSMIL in re-strengthening and recalibrating its approaches. And I think that's a more important evolution than earlier reviews where, for example, the independent review of the mission in Iraq very much focused heavily on the nuts and bolts of a mission's operation and performance. And my personal view is that's not always the most effective use of this high investment and this high profile tool. Maybe, there's a question on ways in which the Secretariat can improve its co-ownership of the review, and perhaps I'll leave that to my other panelists who are in the Secretariat to tackle that. So let me stop there. Thanks, Adam.
Great, thank you. I think he just punted that over to you, Rania, about the role of the Secretariat and and if Jacqueline's still with us, if you have any responses to that question or any final comments before we move to final remarks. Rania, please.
Thanks, Adam. I might just merge that into one for you and make it easier. I have 4 points, and I think the first one is independent reviews are fundamentally positive. And I think they're an evolution of what we had, and it's a very welcome one. How we need to refine their implementation, our ownership and engagement in them as a Secretariat, I think it's a great opportunity that we are revising our overall planning tools and should be able to work out some of these inconsistencies so that there is at least a guiding framework on how we do it. And I honestly don't think it matters who commissions it, Daniel. Whether it's the Council or the Secretary General, this is fundamentally about how we're doing business on ground, and it doesn't matter to those on ground who's commissioned it. So I think it's important we don't get hung up on that, but it is important that we break down the trust deficit so that the Council does not end up using this, as you said, as their primary tool. It isn't. And I think it goes back to us to do this more ably and to engage them and to engage fundamentally the missions and those on ground, to Yusuf's point, more respectfully. because that's where the true narrative is. It isn't in this headquarters. And I think my final point is actually one related to capacity. In the peace and security pillar, as Jackie said, the regional divisions and the desks take the brunt of this. And I think there's a need for a joint planning capacity that works across the peace and security reform, that supports desks and works with them to ensure the processes are well defined, implementation is followed up on, to the points Daniel raises. But there is a need for an entity that does that. And I think it's a joint peace and security capacity. So it doesn't embroil the SG's office in operations either. So I'll leave it with these 4 points, and at the risk of not giving you a very detailed response to how we can implement, I think we haven't thought that through, and we have to do so ASAP.
Fantastic, thank you, Jackie. Any final comments? You actually began to speak quite a bit about implementation, but also this question about secretariat co-ownership, which I know is related to whether it's the secretariat or the SG that commissions these reports. Jackie, please.
Thank you very much. I am just going to say 3 words. I promise you I'll be short. One is constituencies. I think that independent strategic review, in order to be successful, need to take into account all constituencies. We talked a lot about member states, about secretariat. Rania emphasized the people on the ground, as in the mission, the relevant missions and UN staff. But I want to emphasize the staff themselves, because strategic review, and I think that point was made in the report, are often perceived as an exercise to come in and do some post-cutting. So the trust deficit can be addressed if we focus a little bit more on staff. So that's comment number 1. My second comment is with regard to ownership. I think that ownership and follow-up are linked. If we agree, it's easier to follow up on recommendations. It's much harder to ensure that they're implemented if we don't agree in the first place with the recommendations. So the process that we will devise will depend on that. And this is an honest reaction and not the politically correct one. And then finally, with regard to should we have a team to follow up, I would say yes. Again, flexibility should be exercised in the way that's implemented. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Fantastic. I think that your last honest point is really quite critical. It's hard to implement recommendations that you don't agree with, but then of course that, as you say, ownership and implementation are important, are linked, and so is consultation. So it's really important that through the process, these recommendations don't come out of nowhere. They come from the broad consultations that are conducted by the reviews. Fantastic.
Adam, I'm
Yes.
sorry to butt in again. Forgive me, but I'm conscious Ayaka is not with us.
Yeah.
I have a very different perspective on resourcing.
Yeah.
I think they're all expensive. Independent reviews are expensive, but hell, so were our internal reviews, followed by a TAM, 30 people going in, and then another 30 people going in. They were hundreds of thousands. So let's just not forget that they're all expensive and hence have to be used at the right moments. But I think I would argue independent reviews weren't an additional cost out of nothing. If we were serious about doing reviews of our missions, we would have had to accept some of that responsibility anyway. Anyway, I think that's quite controversial, but the bottom line is they're all expensive.
No, but I think that again makes the point about timing, the resourcing, that it's very important that these are done at strategic moments that have impact, because of course they do take resources. Very good. Yusuf, any final comments from you before we turn to closing remarks?
No, none. Thank you very much.
I think great. Well then, Daniel, did you have any no further from those interventions? Great. So then we'll turn to Ms. Alice Jacobs from the UK mission. She's the UN's deputy political coordinator at the UK mission to the United Nations. Alice, please, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Adam, and a big thank you to you and IPI for hosting this. The UK was very pleased to support the first phase of this work, as you've mentioned, and also grateful that support from Switzerland and France has been able to bring it to a conclusion. And thank you, Daniel, also for your very fruitful research, and all the panelists today for the discussion. It's particularly helpful to hear directly from Secretariat colleagues to hear how the report has really sort of landed with you and your reflections as policy practitioners. So thank you. In some ways, the most significant top-level contribution of this report is that it kickstarts this kind of conversation. And by framing of the political context in which independent reviews came into being and how they've evolved since 2017, the report provides the Council and the UN system with food for more considered thought about how we get the most out of all of the assessment and evaluation tools at its disposal. The UK has long championed improving efficiency, performance and impact of peace operations. And as a council member, we know how mission mandates require very complex analysis and decision-making. And all the more so as we rightly put more and more emphasis on the need for a more holistic and joined up and integrated approach of the UN presence in countries or regions. And it's also how we get those transition moments right. And increasingly the need to consider how the UN's role and presence sits with other regional organizations and partners. So it's very good to hear from Ayaka and Rania and Jacqueline, lots of emphasis on that holistic approach too, and progress on the integrated planning tools of the UN. So independent reviews are a really valuable tool for the Security Council. And it's all the more important that we keep improving them. So the various motivations for independent reviews listed are for better, for worse, all familiar, as today you've outlined and also in the report. We do hope that the period of limited trust between the council members and the Secretariat is largely behind us. But the report also shows that the innovation that can come out of those sorts of frustrations. For the UK, as penholder in the council, the recent independent review of UNSMIL, for instance, was extremely useful, and including in its ability to bring candor about some of the internal structural problems with the mission in Libya. So I think it's important that we continue to hone this innovation, and this exercise of reviewing of the reviews has given us a lot of information we need to do that. Just reflecting on comments today, I hear you all when you talk about resourcing and the appeals to the Security Council to give enough time to produce these reviews. And as a former secondee myself in DPPA, I can appreciate the capacity issues and just what goes into preparing any report, let alone independent one. But just to close, the UK is grateful for this analysis, and we look forward to unpacking the very practical recommendations that further as we follow up with our council colleagues and the Secretariat. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you so much, Alice. And thank you all to everyone. This has been a really rich conversation and detailed, but also structured. Just thanks to the UK again. Thank you to Switzerland, France, EOSG, DPO, and DPPA for their cooperation throughout this whole endeavor. We've been talking a bit about implementation, the independent implementation of recommendations from independent reviews, but we also have a job to implement further this report. So this conversation will continue, and we really look forward to continuing to engage with all of you on these such important issues. So thank you once again. Thank you to our viewers, and we'll continue the conversation. Thank you so much. Take care.